by Russia to basically affect that change. I wanted to say something, Jason, before. There's a common thing that you hear right now, which is, economic sanctions don't work. And I just wanted to talk about that for 1 second, which is, I think there's a lot of chatter that historically economic sanctions aren't enough, which is why you can't draw a very clear, bright line between that and military intervention as well. And as I thought about it, this is why I think you can actually fight an economic battle and an economic conflict without it pulling you into a military one. And the reason is actually because of what's happened in the last 40 or 50 years. You have like the most critical infrastructure in the world, I think, is the financial infrastructure, whether we like it or not, right? Because, energy infrastructure tends to be more localized. Other forms of infrastructure are localized. But the one real asset that is absolutely global and universal is the financial payments infrastructure. And, what has really happened is that you can really cripple a country or an entity when you blacklist them from these organizations and these networks. And so this is why I actually think people underestimate the severity of economic sanctions if done correctly. And I think before, you've never really, other than, Venezuela and a couple of other, North Korea,
Cuba, Venezuela.
You've never really explored the totality and the impact of this kind of sanctions on a large global actor.
This is almost greater than sanctions. You're not allowed to participate. It's not even like you're saying you can't export this, you can't import this. It's you're now not allowed. You have no seat at the table.
I think the crude oil example and the airline industry example are two incredible examples of the ripple effects of these sanctions, right? So again, just to reiterate, like if you're a European-based refiner, in order for you to go and buy that oil, you may have, a working capital line from a German bank. Well, that would violate the terms of that bank now. And so you can't go and get that, right? If you actually have that oil on hand and you refine it into gasoline and you want to put it into the open market and you call Flexport as an example and say, help me get this stuff to XYZ location or Maersk or somebody else, they won't do it.
I mean, and you look at the tech sanctions that have started, it sounds minor, but you have Netflix is pulled out of the country. Apple is not selling products in the country. Google is starting to restrict services in the company. And this is going to have a massive impact on their ability to just participate in society. They just turned off proactively this morning. I don't know if you saw that. It was right as we were getting on air. Facebook's been banned. Instagram is still on. Twitter's still on. But the Russians now are turning off information into the country while every other company is turning off their services there.
I think the global economy, or not even the global economy, I think Japan, Europe, Canada, America can collectively support $5, $6, $7 trillion of subsidies to blunt the economic impact of these sanctions. That's effectively shutting Russian exports off for 8, 9, 10 years. Think about that is the damage.
Any thoughts here as we kind of come to no way out here and just the Russian economy being decoupled?
So I think that if we're going to figure out a way out, we need to assess what our objectives are. And we talked earlier on the show about this idea of regime change and that there wouldn't be an answer without regime change. I disagree with that. Just those two words, regime change, should make everybody cringe because regime change was the justification for the Iraq War, for Afghanistan, for Libya, for Syria, and every single one of those things has been a disaster. When has the United States of America successfully achieved regime change in the last 20 years without creating enormous blowback? There's an assumption that somehow if Putin gets toppled by an internal coup, that we end up with Gorbachev 2.0. Well, maybe we do.
It's a coin toss.
Maybe we end up with a hardliner who's even worse.
What should the goal be? Obviously, regime change would be wonderful if the Russian people chose that. But what is the
I'd say ceasefire.
Ceasefire and peace, right? Yeah, I agree.
Ceasefire. So I think Putin miscalculated the resolve of Zelensky and the West. Zelensky was like this TV actor, became president. Before this, he was like 25% popularity. Now he's at 90-something%. I think Putin underestimated his resolve.
Would you say Putin has lost the information war? I mean, that's pretty staggering.
Yes.
I mean, it's pretty clear that Putin thought he could win this information war, and this is the first meme war. Yeah,
I agree. It is a meme war. I think we're being heavily propagandized. But the
West is winning the propaganda war.
But Jake,
it's not just the West.
Look at but I mean, look at where you're sitting, right?
Ukraine is engaged in that effort too, right?
Sure.
I mean, you had the whole Snake Island thing, where basically
did that wind up being confirmed as fake news?
That was fake. Okay, you had Snake Island, where the 13 Ukrainian soldiers said, "We're going to bring us death rather than surrender." It turns out they actually surrendered. You had the old woman walking up to the Russian soldiers with
tell them to get the hell out of here.
Yeah, exactly. That was a fake. What else? I mean, I think everything's fake. This Chernobyl 2.0 was fake. Oh, that was half fighter fake. Pilot. The fighter pilot was the ghost of Kiev.
Yeah,
exactly. That turned out to be a fake. So look, we are being heavily propagandized. Now, I don't blame Zelensky or the Ukrainians for trying to propagandize us, because they're a small country fighting for their lives. And if they can pull us into the war, it would help them. It might also cause World War III.
Or just win hearts and minds and flip Russian sentiment.
There's something else that's really interesting. I just went to the World Bank site just to check whether the GDP number that I just gave you was right. And it is right. But what's even more interesting is that Russian GDP has actually decayed 35% in the last decade. It peaked in 2013 at $2.292 trillion. And all the way down to now 1.483. So I think the point is, with all of these other things that they've been having to deal with because of their foreign adventurism, you've seen a contraction of their economy already.
Friedberg, did the West and everybody overestimate Russia's capabilities here? I mean, is that a possibility? Because they seem like they're getting beaten pretty, or they're being fought back at a way people didn't think they would be able to.
First of all, I have no friggin' clue. Second of all, I don't know what people think that they thought they knew or do or don't know. But I think importantly, we don't really know what's going on over there. We are hearing stories every day that we feel is conclusive and factual and on the ground reporting. And then a few hours later, we find out may or may not actually be true. This is the fog of war. And I wouldn't take anything that I'm reading on Twitter or seeing on CNN or hearing some commentator from the United States making some comment about, nor would I feel the same about any commentator in the Ukraine or Russia or anywhere else for that matter. Facts are going to be facts. I'm not sure facts are necessarily going to get to us. And so I don't know what's going on the ground with Russia. There's a convoy, supposedly, that we know we can see from satellite imagery that's moving towards Kiev. It's stopped. We don't know why it stopped. There's claims by one group of people that says they're out of food and they're defecting. There's claims by another group of people that say they're waiting to encircle the city and then command pressure and use this as leverage effectively to try and get a good negotiated deal to exit. We don't know. And so, for us to be like, four guys commentating at Starbucks, I think is a bit of a mistake, because there's very few facts that we can't actually say is objectively true at this point. Now, what we do know is Russia has a lot of nukes. And so regardless of what's going on the ground with tactical stuff, any sort of assumption that leads to our belief that an alternative intervention or some other force can ultimately win against Russia is completely false, because Russia has thousands of nuclear warheads. And, if Russia wanted to exert its military authority over anyone in the world, they can. And so I wouldn't kind of take any of this stuff that Russia is going to lose a war, a war on the ground in the Ukraine. I mean, at the end of the day, they've got the ultimate trump card.
Well, and also they haven't brought out the heavy.
They've got bombers.
They can bomb Kyiv into rubble. Okay,
they've got those bunker buster bombs. They've got stuff that.
What is the strategy here to just
listen? They can pull a Grozny. They can pull a Fallujah. I mean, look, we can a Dresden. Let's not pretend like we haven't done it too. They can bomb these cities into rubble from the sky.
And they're not, because it would be too bad. The blowback would be too bad from the West.
We don't know, but there's certainly a strategy. These guys aren't a bunch of idiots scrambling around trying to figure out what to do. They've got the second most powerful military on planet Earth that can literally destroy every human on planet Earth. They are pretty smart, and they are going to figure something out to get themselves some sort of an advantage ultimately. What that is, we don't know. We're sitting here trying to figure out how to play chess when we've never played it before.
I mean, Sacks, that might be something worth discussing. I mean, there is a contingent that say, listen, Putin isn't thinking about this strictly logically.
Yeah, I understand that point of view. You hear it a lot on the press.
What do you think?
Here's what I think is I think Putin underestimated Zelensky's resolve, Ukrainian resolve, and I'd say the West resolve. I think it would be a mistake, however, for us to underestimate his resolve.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm afraid of next is that he doesn't want to give up. And listen, to go back to the Mearsheimer point. So there's a school of realism, and what Mearsheimer says, and he predicted a lot of this. So you have
It's amazing. Yeah. He gave a great talk in 2015. Right. I watched it right before we got on air.
Right. One of the ways
we'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah. One of the ways I assess who I want to listen to and learn more from is when I see someone making farsighted predictions that come true, I'm like, okay.
Pretty good one. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, okay, this guy has a mental model that seems to predict the world, right? I mean, like Karl Popper said famously that the difference between science and religion is that science makes predictions that are falsifiable. If you make predictions, one prediction after another that ends up becoming true, maybe you have a way of thinking about the world that is predictive. So this guy, I would just say, I can't summarize all of his thinking here, but I would just say, I mean, I went down kind of a rabbit hole on YouTube just watching his stuff. Obviously not all of it is right. Okay. But the media has been demonizing this guy because for the few things he's gotten wrong about the situation, instead of all the things he's gotten right. And, if you were to do the Washington establishment by the same standard, they've gotten far more wrong than he has, especially over, since the Iraq war over the last 20 years. But anyway, the point he makes is simply this, or one of the points is, listen, this situation in Ukraine is to the Russians what the Cuban Missile Crisis was to us, meaning it is not a pretext for Putin to go in and expand his empire. What is really going on here is they have defined this as a red line they see as a vital national security interest. And so we should be thinking about them and their resolve the way that we thought about the Cuban Missile Crisis. So in other words, the Russians are acting like the Americans did in the Cuban Missile Crisis. And remember, Fidel Castro thought he had the sovereignty. He thought he had the right to go make a treaty and a deal with whoever he wanted. And he freely went to the Soviet Union to try and make a deal. And the Americans said, no way. And, not in our backyard. And we imposed a blockade and we were flying the bombers, and Kennedy had advisors and generals who were willing to go to nuclear war to win that standoff and that confrontation. And ultimately, the way that they solved the problem is JFK sent Bobby Kennedy to go secretly cut a deal with the Russians to pull the Jupiter missiles, the warheads, out of Turkey. So there's a quid pro quo. They kept it secret for 6 months. Kennedy got to declare a victory, but the Soviets got something out of it too. They were able to defuse the situation. So if there's any way to make a deal like that, I think it would be a good idea.
Yeah. I mean, don't you think the reason, Sacks, that he is misunderstood is because we are propagating democracy. And when we do something, well, it has the shine of, hey, we want people to be free. We want individual freedom. We want individual human rights. We want individual expression. These things are the height of human existence. And when communist countries do it, well, they're trying to spread communism and authoritarianism and reduce humans' individualism and freedoms. And that is a valid argument. But he says in his talks, like, listen, you can put that aside and just say, missiles in your backyard, not good.
Yeah, exactly. So this is the fundamental dichotomy in sort of in foreign policy thinking or international relations is between idealism and realism. Idealism says it's all about values. And so we're going around the world, we're promoting democracy, we're supporting allies who we think will spread democracy. There's good guys and bad guys. We're on the sides of the good guys, and that's who we support, and we change the regimes that are the bad guys. But the realists think of this as great power rivalry. And we have to understand the way that great powers have always reacted and behaved. And great powers, whether it's Russia or the Soviet Union or us, will behave viciously and ruthlessly towards anything they perceive as a threat to their national security their vital national security interests.
What are your thoughts on this being the moment we make the next big transition? We were in a bipolar world order. We're being unipolar for the majority of our lifetimes, where we only experienced the United States. And now, is this the moment we move to multipolar, Sacks? Where we're going to, or have we moved there already?
It's there's a transition that's happening mainly because of China. So it seems like what we're doing is pushing Russia irrevocably into Xi's arms. He's going to be
a huge mistake.
He's part of that. Well, I'm surprised to hear you say that, Jake. How?
Well, I said it 2 weeks ago. I said this sounds crazy, but if we could get Putin to be, in talks with us, then he's not in talks with Xi Jinping. And when you saw him with, taking pictures with Xi Jinping, that should have been a red alarm bell to everybody that our foreign policy is not working. Because if he's talking to Xi Jinping, supposedly, and who knows if this is true, again, fog of war to Friedberg's point, maybe Xi Jinping told him, can you wait till after the Olympics to do this invasion? If they're coordinating at that level, that's really problematic for the US. We need him on our side. We need to get Pakistan on our side, India, South Korea. We need to build an alliance to deal with the eventuality of China going into the South China Sea and taking over Taiwan. So, Chamath, what are your thoughts on, does this give Xi Jinping a window or not? And is there any path to getting Russia back in talks with the West?
Maybe he can help get them restarted in a way that could normalize relations. This is, the real question is like, if you're Xi, do you look at this and say, it emboldens me, or I have to be even more strategic and crafty?
What do you think? I say the latter.
Yeah.
It's the latter, right? If Russia had rolled,
right,
it'd be the former.
This is one good thing, and I'll sort of contradict what I said a little bit before. Look, I'm not passionately attached to either the realist or the idealist school of thinking. I think they're interesting. We need to consider both perspectives. What I would say is that the resilience, the ferocity of the Ukrainians, the resistance, defending themselves, giving Putin a punch in the nose, we can all support that because we know that Xi is watching. And if he sees, wow, the Russians really got a tough time with Ukrainians, am I going to be facing a similar situation with Taiwan? And what's interesting is that the way the Ukrainians, they basically were willing to arm every man, woman, and child, but every man and woman there, they were handing out the AK-47s. Basically, they Israelized, right? You want to know how Israel has survived in a neighborhood where everyone wants to kill them? Every single adult serves in the army and they get guns. It's like,
they're
Second Amendment over there.
Forced
yeah, exactly. So I think that the Ukrainians have shown a model that's really based on the Israel model, which is, listen, if Taiwan really wants to be independent, every adult there needs to learn how to fight and they need to have weapons. And that's going to be the best guarantee. We can be their ally, but that's going to be the best guarantor, is creating a credible deterrent to Xi moving on them.
I mean, do we transition to another story here? I mean, this is one of the problems when we're living in these kind of times, is that if you talk about anything other than this
when the decision trees can go, I saw a tweet, when all the decision trees can go to zero, meaning that like there's a 1% chance of, or 0.1% or 0.01% chance of World War III, the nuclear war, then it's hard to talk about anything else, hard to think about anything else. So
yeah.
I watched Ozarks this week.
Boy, amazing.
Is that
great
good?
series.
Ozark? Is that good?
Ozark is great. Jason Bateman, amazing.
Yeah,
great
Jason Bateman is
performances.
so freaking good on it.
Breaking Bad
I've tried to
2.0.
start that series twice, and I've fallen asleep in episode 1 both times.
No. You got to keep going. It rolls. It's basically Breaking Bad 2.0.
Yeah.
Phenomenal.
I started season 2 of Euphoria.
Oh my Lord.
Don't ever let your kids watch it.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Well, it's either that or it's like the best deterrent. So like you make them sit and watch it, and they'll, not only will they never not do drugs, but like they just won't do anything. They'll just stay in the house. It's
scarring. It's basically Requiem for a Dream meets like Disney Plus afternoons. Like these are Disney stars living in Requiem for a Dream. Do not watch it.
I need to decompress after I watch it.
If you have kids, it's terrorizing. It's terrifying.
It's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying.
It's scarring. It's very artistic.